The town of Willow Creek was a place unlike any other. Nestled deep within a valley, it was surrounded by thick forests that seemed to whisper secrets with every passing breeze. Travelers often remarked on the peculiar silence that enveloped the town. Even during the day, when the streets should have been alive with chatter and laughter, an unnatural hush lingered in the air. Birds avoided the area, their songs fading as they neared its boundaries. The townsfolk, too, spoke in hushed tones, as though afraid of disturbing something unseen. I first heard about Willow Creek from an old colleague, Peter, a journalist known for chasing strange stories. His voice trembled as he recounted his brief visit, mentioning the eerie quiet and the strange behavior of the residents. "They know something," he had said. "Something they're too afraid to speak about." Intrigued, I decided to visit the town myself. As a storyteller, I've always been drawn to places with mysteries. There's something about unraveling the unknown that fuels my imagination and keeps my audience on the edge of their seats. Little did I know that this journey would become the most chilling tale I'd ever tell. The road to Willow Creek was narrow and winding, bordered by dense trees that seemed to close in as I drove further. My car's GPS lost signal long before I reached the outskirts of the town, leaving me to rely on an old map I'd printed. As I crossed the wooden bridge marking the town's entrance, an inexplicable chill ran down my spine. The town itself was picturesque, with cobblestone streets and quaint cottages. Yet, the silence was palpable, weighing heavy in the air. I parked my car near what appeared to be the town square, where a solitary fountain stood, its water trickling softly. A few residents glanced my way, their expressions guarded. I approached an elderly man sitting on a bench, his weathered face partially hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. "Excuse me," I began, "I'm just passing through and was curious about the history of this place. It seems unique." He looked up slowly, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and resignation. "Best keep your curiosity in check, stranger," he muttered. "This town has seen enough trouble because of questions." Before I could press further, he stood and shuffled away, leaving me with more questions than answers. Determined to learn more, I checked into the town's only inn, a creaky building run by a woman named Martha. She seemed friendly enough, but grew visibly tense when I mentioned the town's strange atmosphere. "It's better if you don't go poking around," she said, handing me the room key. "Some things are best left buried." That night, I couldn't sleep. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards. Around midnight, I heard faint whispers outside my window. Peering through the curtains, I saw a group of people huddled near the fountain, their faces obscured by shadows. They appeared to be engaged in some sort of ritual, their movements synchronized and deliberate. My pulse quickened as I watched, but before I could make sense of what I was seeing, they dispersed, vanishing into the darkness. The next morning, I ventured to the town's library, hoping to find records or stories that could explain what I'd witnessed. The librarian, a frail woman named Eleanor, hesitated when I asked about the town's history. "There are no official records," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But if you're determined to dig, you might find something in the archives." The archives were a dusty room filled with old books and faded newspapers. As I sifted through the piles, one headline caught my eye: "Mysterious disappearances plague Willow Creek." The article was dated 50 years ago and detailed a series of vanishings that had left the town shaken. Residents had reported seeing strange lights in the woods and hearing unearthly sounds at night. Despite investigations, no trace of the missing was ever found. Another article mentioned a legend about the town's founding. According to the story, Willow Creek was established by a group of settlers fleeing persecution. Desperate for a fresh start, they made a pact with an unknown entity, promising loyalty in exchange for protection and prosperity. For years, the town flourished, but the price of the pact eventually became clear. The settlers' descendants began disappearing one by one, and those who remained were cursed with an unbearable silence. As I read, a sense of dread settled over me. The pieces were beginning to fit together, but I needed confirmation. That evening, I decided to confront Martha, hoping she'd reveal what she knew. "You should leave," she said firmly when I mentioned the articles. "This town isn't safe for outsiders. It's not safe for any of us." What happened to the missing people? I pressed. And what's the deal with the ritual I saw last night? Her eyes widened. You shouldn't have seen that, she whispered. The ritual is our way of appeasing it. If we don't, more of us will be taken. Appeasing what? Before she could answer, the lights flickered, and a low hum filled the air. Martha's face turned pale. It knows, she said, grabbing my arm. You need to leave. Now. But it was too late. The hum grew louder, resonating through my chest. Outside, the townsfolk gathered once more, their faces blank as they marched toward the woods. Against my better judgment, I followed them, keeping a safe distance. They stopped at a clearing where an ancient stone altar stood. The air grew cold, and a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its form shifting and undefined. The townsfolk knelt as the figure spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from another world. The pact remains, it intoned. But the outsider must pay for his curiosity. Panic surged through me as the figure turned its gaze toward me. The townsfolk's eyes, once lifeless, now glowed with an unnatural light. They began to chant, their voices melding into an otherworldly harmony. The shadow advanced, and I felt an icy grip on my soul. In that moment, I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. Not in fear, but in defiance, breaking the oppressive silence that had held the town captive. The shadow recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame. The chanting faltered, and the townsfolk collapsed to the ground, dazed. The figure let out a piercing shriek before vanishing into the night. The silence that followed was different, not oppressive, but peaceful. The curse had been broken. The next morning, the townsfolk thanked me, their voices filled with relief and gratitude. They explained that the pact had bound them to silence, their lives dictated by fear of the entity. By breaking the silence, I had severed its hold. As I drove away from Willow Creek, I couldn't shake the feeling that the entity wasn't gone for good. But for now, the town was free, and I had a story to tell, one that would leave my audience spellbound. And speaking of stories, if you've enjoyed this tale, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling narratives. Who knows what mysteries we'll uncover next? Until then, stay curious, but not too curious.